of things. David Gillespie is recording this for cable. If we're going to speak, we're going to have to move the microphone around, with the exception of the back table, or
I can get them from this mic, but everyone else needs to from the front.
Okay. All right. So we're going to start this evening. I want to thank everyone for coming out. The plan for tonight is pretty aggressive. We do really want to get through as best we can the recommendations that we have for our goals that are set. It's still going to be in a draft form, right? Because we still want to have input from the community at the next public forum. In order for us to have a public forum that we're hoping for in the February timeframe, we would need to get through them for the most part for tonight. And we do have a tentative meeting scheduled for January 24th if we need that. But we'll recap at the end of the night to see how we're doing and how everybody's feeling. We don't want to rush through it, but we also want to be purposeful in our discussion and dialogue on each of them. So with that, I'm just going to hand it over to Jeffrey and Donnie so that they can bring us up to speed as to where we've been.
Okay, thanks, Fran. I think this microphone might be the biggest challenge of the night as we pass it around. Let's hope that it is for the group. I just wanted to say it's great to be back again, and obviously we really enjoyed taking these steps for the whole committee and the community, and as we've been advancing the plan with you over the last few months. Just to set some of the high level of stuff before I hand it off to Donnie, we've had a couple of rounds of great conversations, I would say, about getting the goals really advanced, starting to lock those in. We've had a couple of rounds in terms of the recommendations that really came at the back part of our last meeting, where we really didn't get into them, but we sent them out to get some of that initial feedback from the committee. So I think we're really looking forward to tonight being a really good conversation from the committee to debate back and forth the recommendations. And I'm saying in terms of our goal for tonight, as much as we can actually cover, as Fran said, in those recommendations to get that dialogue going, just like we did last time. We'll have all the resources up here like we've done with the goals to go through them. And we really want to spend most of the night listening from the committee about what you like, what you don't like. And hopefully, we're going to feel comfortable enough at the back end of tonight where we can lock this in, underscore as a draft, so that we can get ready to start sharing with the public in a much broader sense as well. So before we dive into the recommendations, I think Donnie wants to go over a little bit about where we are in the project and a couple of the broader updates, and then we'll dive into the recommendations as well.
Thanks, Jeffrey. So just at a very high level, I just want to remind everybody where we are in the process. So we have documented the existing additions and worked on the analysis. We confirmed some of the details related to that analysis. We developed the community vision statement as well as the goals associated with that vision. So last time we were here, we sort of locked that in there. And again, underscore draft. You'll see that in the comments here, there may be an opportunity for adjustment to one or maybe two of the goals that we've identified. All of that information that we've presented and approved of last steering committee meeting has gone on the public project website, so the public is able to view all of that, as are the results of the surveys. So in full transparency, all of the full comments for both of the surveys are posted on the website. As you can see in the schedule, we're sort of in the drafting of the plan elements. We are getting toward the drafting of the plan elements, and we're in the midst of getting into the implementation plan. So as we develop these recommendations, we want to start sharing them with doing some in-reach with the town departments and with the town committees and boards, all of the volunteers that do good work there, and we also want to share it with the public and then start to prioritize these things for implementation, and then starting to put some accountability toward that implementation plan with identifying the lead entities, whoever they may be, and the supporting entities that are going to take the reins to move the actions into reality. And in the midst of that, we're going to be identifying any possible financial incentives and available grants and things like that to support the financing aspect of it, because not everything can be implemented on day one. We do want to start prioritizing, being realistic about the capacity of the town to implement these goals and these actions, and then of course the costs that are associated with them are considerations. So moving on to, there's a very short opening of the presentation. Moving on, yeah, the lights may help. So the last time we met and the last time we went over the goal, the vision and the goals, I thought it was very helpful to have everybody's comments received individually and then shared with everybody, and in terms of track changes and comments, to show everybody what others were thinking, why things were changed, pose additional questions, flag things for discussion. So we did the same thing here. We received several comments or groups of comments from individuals: Amy, Ashley, Norm, Jason, Susan from the schools committee, Rick, and Kathy provided some comments as well. So Kathy's comments are actually represented in this version here. I apologize. This version does not have her comments, but I think a lot of Kathy's comments were contextual, so adding a little bit of food for thought to a lot of the individual recommendations. So in that respect, we chose to go about it in the same manner that we did with the vision and the goals. So you'll see that all of the changes that were made reflect the submissions that were received. So if we want to just provide an overview of the comments that we did get, they were very, very helpful. They provided 1, some clarity, 2, some corrections, 3, some updates on things that have been accomplished so far. So for example, you guys were designated as a green community in end of December, so I think that aspects of that can be incorporated into this set of recommendations, because I think obviously you have an energy reduction plan now we want to incorporate, and other aspects related to the designation of a green community, the green fleets, the stretch code, the renewable energy sightings, and permitting expeditions. So all of that is great, and I think it was a street light number 20 that we wanted to remove as well that you guys have, that was installed. So all of that represents some really great comments. We just want to talk through those comments with you, and I think maybe simplify a little bit, because you guys have a lot of great ideas and a lot of great detail, but we want to just, in some instances, just take it a step back and get to the intent of the recommendation, and we'll get into the specifics with where they're relevant, but if we may get going. So with the overarching element of land use, I think there was a theme of a preference indicating that small housing units are better suited for the downtown to preserve a predominantly single-family feel in the rest of town. And my thought was that we have these priority development areas that have already been identified, and I think that was sort of similar to what you guys are getting at, the downtown being one of the priority development areas. So I think that's reflected throughout, and I think that if where I think it contradicts, we can talk a little bit about that and see what the issues are. But that was one of the main issues with the land use. And there was also, in terms of allocation of recommendations, some movement of land use recommendations down to housing, down to economic development, where people thought it was better suited. So those are the high levels. If we want to get into the individual recommendations, the first one: conduct a cost of community services study to prove the economic value of open space and natural lands. I think this was an early submission by you, Ashley. And there was some talk about whether or not this is actually needed based upon the town's already strong support for open space. And but there were also some comments related to how do we preserve urban space, how do we make the case. If there are, and this is just my comment back to the group, is that if there are questions about what is the best from an economic standpoint, the development of a parcel with in terms of commercial development, residential development, industrial development, or keeping it open space, a cost of community services study can support that. It can tell you what you're spending on that property, or what you would spend on that property versus what you would get back to the municipal tax roll. So I deleted it here tentatively, but I wanted to open it up for further discussion.
I would say also that it may come out showing that commercial is more valuable to the town than open space. Sometimes those are even, sometimes open space is more valuable. Almost every time residential is shown as costing the town more than the other two.
Exactly.
But it could come out, it could show us something new and different. So it might be valuable regardless, just to sort of guide decisions.
several.
And I would say too, I mean, this is something that can be done by the assessor and a volunteer
Yeah.
very quickly, just by plugging in numbers into a formula.
Right, it's not a complicated study, it doesn't require a lot of background in economic, and fiscal analysis. So it is a, go ahead.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to try talking loud, David, so we don't have to pass it. Just because I get confused with recommendations and then implementation.
Mhm.
If this was not in recommendations, is it a tool in order to achieve one of the recommendations? Because I think there's value to that study, but is it appropriate in a recommendation, or is it like the next level at the action step?
I think it's up to you, really. I think it is another tool in the toolbox, but putting it down as a recommendation is something that puts it on your radar and says, you're going to do that, and then you have it in your back pocket when other recommendations come up and you can reference it.
Thank you.
I think my sense is, at least my understanding was that the things we're talking about now are the action steps we're recommending be taken to implement the goal that we're talking about. So my sense is it would make sense to overdo the recommendations a little bit as opposed to start deleting them. I mean, over time, the town will have to decide how much it wants to do and when, and I think you guys should probably put together some sort of an actual priority of what to do when anyway. But my sense would be as we go through these tonight, and if we have to come back another night, as opposed to just deleting things, the more that's in here that gives some guidance about what to do, we'll leave it in, and then over time, the town will decide how to do what.
And I think, Fran, to just your question, and Rick's to your point about prioritization, as you get into the prioritizing these recommendations, you'll find that there are some things that need to be done before other things. So a cost of community services study, for example, is something that is kind of a low-hanging fruit rather, activity. You can put that up front, say you're going to do that with the assessor and perhaps a volunteer, or perhaps, with a volunteer, and then say, okay, well, once we get that done, then we can start working on some of the other recommendations.
All right, open up to the group. What do people think about Rick's point of more is better at this point?
I think it depends on the item. Like, I don't think it can be an overall, leave everything in or don't leave everything in. I think you have to go through item by item.
Right.
But I think in the case of a study, that's just something that.
Oh, yeah,
provides more
I agree with the
knowledge.
first one.
I mean, that one to me makes sense. Generally, I would agree with the concept of leaving in what we can. We still have the luxury of leaving ideas on the table. And, I mean, to your point, Amy, some of them we may decide are not appropriate at this time to keep, but, yeah.
I mean, obviously.
Right, but I think this is our ability to put down what we want to do. We talked about mission, we shouldn't get too detailed. When we talked about goals, we said we shouldn't get too detailed. This is our last shot at putting details. There's nothing else after this. So if anybody feels there's something that ought to come out to sort of guide what to do about one of these things that ought to be in here as opposed to not being here. So I'm sensing the group is in favor of not deleting this particular item, but leaving it in place.
So if we want to just like show of hands, and this right here, Donnie, and we'll move on to the next one. All those wanting to leave this in as a recommendation or action step. All right, majority of people. Okay, Donnie, we'll leave it in.
So the next recommendation is to build off of the 495 Metro West Development Compact Plan to inventory local priority development areas and priority preservation areas to guide future development activities in town. There wasn't any comment on that, but from the submissions that I received, but is there any thought on building upon that list?
So this is another study essentially, if I'm reading it right? It's an inventory.
Yeah, I mean, you could call it another study. It's more, yeah.
As far as the compact plan?
Building upon the PDAs and PDAs.
Yeah. The plan itself was done several years ago, but it can always be, updated. So to keep it updated and put parcels on, take parcels off, that's natural to do that
Okay.
on this particular plan.
I think we could update the recommendation to say that, update the 485 Metro West Development Compact Plan to, as necessary and as the PDAs and PPAs are identified,
Does the PDA define public versus private by nature?
No, the PDAs and the PBAs aren't necessarily parcel driven. They're more general areas. So it would be a mix of public owned property and privately held property.
So you're lumping large parcels together, not individual parcels.
It could also be a grouping, a cluster of smaller parcels as well. It varies.
Do we
It's just-
keep an inventory, Kathy?
It's actually the 495 partnership that did the original compact plan for this area. And so each town, we all participated in that, and each town submitted areas that we wanted to have on the compact plan or in the compact plan. And so, it's pretty much the parcels we talk about all the time. Bartlett Street, the Gutierrez property, I mean, at this point now, that's all pretty much getting developed, or built out. We talked about, the southwest corridors on there of, what else can be built out in Northborough, along that section of Route 20 and Route 9. And I can't remember if we had Barefoot Road up there or not. But I can double check on what we did originally put on that plan.
But it's just another way, and I think what you guys have been talking about this all along, is making sure development is in areas that we want development, and it's not all over the place, and it's not encroaching upon natural resources in sensitive areas, areas with environmental and social value, public health value, and all that. There's no comment on it, but if there's any, is there any comment on any change proposal?
I just was curious if we had any inventory that we're building on or creating, that's all.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a starting point.
Okay.
So the next one was recommended for deletion, Smart Growth Zoning District. The idea around this was to, again, kind of concentrate development, if there is going to be development in an area, concentrate development in certain portions of those areas, as opposed to the, for example, a full parcel. I think that, along with Smart Growth Zoning District, there are requirements for affordable housing. And I think that through the rest of the comments, it seemed that that wasn't the way that you guys wanted to go. And I think that what has been identified and what I've seen as somewhat of an appetite for affordable housing is related to inclusionary zoning. And I know that Kathy has some thoughts on this because you tried to go down this route before, and maybe Kathy can elaborate on it. But inclusionary zoning is not tied to Chapter 40B necessarily. The town can make their own income brackets. I think it makes sense for Northborough, given that the housing prices are going up and up and up, and you've met your Chapter 40B requirements. You're still going to have to maintain that over the number of years in the future, but it does allow some flexibility. So, Kathy, did you want to just provide a little bit?
Sure. Years ago, when we as the town first developed a specific housing plan for the community, one of the recommendations among many was to adopt, explore and adopt what's called an inclusionary zoning bylaw. And sort of just to get in to test the waters, and this was back in the 2000, beginning, 2000. Our inclusionary zoning bylaw, which basically said, in that particular case, was any development that was over 5 lots. So basically, you're looking at, a small subdivision on that. The developer or the applicant had to include 10% of, at least 10% of the units had to be set aside or reserved as affordable housing. And we didn't have a mechanism. They actually had to build the units. A lot of the bylaws today you see that are on the books that there's really mixed reviews about is sometimes the developer is able to donate the money to the town, and the town puts it into a housing trust. and then the town develops affordable housing. But, you know, towns themselves are not developers. I mean, the success we've had in this town is because of a nonprofit, working with another nonprofit. You know, the Housing Corporation, and then Habitat for Humanity has just been very active here. But, so back when we introduced it and it was adopted at town meeting, it was really just sort of getting our feet wet into inclusionary zoning. And then at some point, many years later, or several years later, the planning board at the time thought that because it wasn't being used, that maybe we should take it off the books, since nobody had taken advantage of it. So that did happen at town meeting, so the bylaw was deleted. But it's definitely something that I think that we should look at, because, you know, look at in the future, because it is one of the only sure ways to make sure that you keep after that 10%. And again, not that the 10% is, you know, there's the 10% requirement, and then there's a housing needs. They're two different animals.
Yeah, and just to clarify, so those bylaws, they don't have to be tied to that. I think it's 80% of the area's median income. I think it is sort of up to the town, and I think, Rick, you had, was it one of your comments on your housing? I don't mean to jump around with amongst the elements, but I think you talked about, or was it Amy that talked about the housing price points and identifying the price points, and then, yeah, so it's really, you know, doing a market survey, understanding the income needs within the community, whether they range from low to mid and moderate, you know, just, and then tailoring the inclusionary zoning bylaw to that, really.
I guess I'm not understanding where the recommendation came to delete this particular item. Did you guys do that, or did someone on the committee recommend we delete this?
Somebody, yeah, if anything was deleted, it was recommended by the committee, and I think that it was
So
just.
whoever recommended, could you speak to that for a second?
Sure. It was me because I'm on the planning board, and when I first read the draft bylaws, I went through and I say, oh, there's a lot. There's smart growth, there's that middle, and there's inclusionary. So I actually studied all three and said, what do I think would work best for Northborough? And when I read about smart growth, that was high-density housing that was near like a ferry, near a train station, maybe like in Westboro, but it wasn't something that I saw downtown Northborough. Like, you can override all the zoning bylaws and bypass if you put in affordable housing. But when I looked at inclusionary, that seemed to fit Northborough better because we've met our 40B. And I also compared it to Hudson and Shrewsbury. I read both of their master plans because they're pretty new. And right in Hudson's, it said, because you guys have met your 40B, a better way to do it is inclusionary. And that will just keep you above your 10% without having to do smart growth. And I just didn't feel like smart growth looked like it fit in our town because it was very high density. And if anything, it seemed like Avalon kind of fell into that already. We have the housing, which had the 40B, it's near shops, it's near the highway. It seemed like we already fit that need. So I felt inclusionary was the way to go.
And just a question, so in terms of when inclusionary housing is something you do, it's like you, so the last time we did it, it was like every time there was 5 lots of living or more. Does it have to be every time, or is it something that gets approved as it goes along if you're?
Well, you, I mean, the premise of it is that you want it to be uniformly applied.
Okay.
So you pick a number, 5, it doesn't have to be 5, but it's everyone needs to participate in it. I mean, it's a tiny little bit like an impact fee or an impact structure where everybody that's building in your town is participating in it. So it levels the playing field. So whether you build, 5 houses or you build, 100 houses, you're participating in helping keeping up the affordable housing stock. And again, like Donnie said, whatever median income, it can vary. You don't have to stick with the 80% for the state. Yeah. The thing though about the smart growth is I would I mean, you're absolutely correct, Amy, as far as the, there's some parameters around it that, you have to be within so many miles of, public transportation. And so there's some areas where Northborough just, if you just look very strictly at it, well, oh, that doesn't apply to us because, if you can just take public transportation right off the table. But the thing about the smart growth is that it's multi-use. It's not just housing, where you're looking at inclusionary zoning. You're just looking at residential development. I mean, smart growth involves mixed use, so I mean, I think it's just another tool for us to explore. Having it in here doesn't mean that you're going to do it, but I think in here acknowledges that there are some things that you might want to take a look at as a community.
I have a question and a statement. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So I like the idea of the inclusionary zoning because it allows Northborough to stay at that 10% so that we have control. So a developer can't come in and say, "Oh, we're just going to use 40B." Well, sorry, no, we're already at 10%. You don't have the control. We do. But in smart growth, do we still have some control, or is it more like 40B where they can come in and say, "Well, we meet these parameters, so we're going to do whatever we want to do"? I guess that's my only question.
I honestly, I can't answer that.
Yeah,
I don't know enough about it.
Our land use experts on the team, and I can certainly get back to you directly on that. I can provide more information on what the requirements are and what levels of control the town would have if something like that was adopted.
My understanding from talking to the people that have done housing development is typically 40Rs are driven by the community. Typically developers don't come in and propose a 40R like they could a 40B. It's more of a tool or a
It
community.
doesn't provide the developer some kind of incentive.
But typically, as Amy said, it's typically a community that meets a lot of the requirements of 40R that can use it as a way to put a project together to create retail development and housing around public transportation, which is kind of what the state is looking for. So
there's a lot of terms that were put in that I just had no idea about, and I tried to research, but it's kind of, they're kind of very tricky to learn on a short basis. So what is the benefit of smart growth beyond what's allowed through zoning? So we have mixed development now in downtown. What would this provide us above and beyond what we currently have?
Well, I think you're talking about John getting some information from the land use.
Oh, for land wise?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I would refer specifically to someone else on our team.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I think actually that's a good point. I mean, if there's anything that is questionable or needs better definition, I could certainly send out a memo or just an email or just.
All right, so we'll table this one recommendation, keeping in mind that while we don't have public transportation, and that's one of the many criteria for smart growth, that is one of our long-range goals as well, is to improve transportation and access. So let's table that one for now so we can keep going and come back to it either through email and then at our next meeting.
If I may, just real quick, I think Rick's on the right track, but this is meant to be a proactive approach towards the town saying where you want to do this and putting some parameters around it as well, versus waiting on someone to propose a development that can supersede some of your zoning requirements.
Great.
So we'll give you more
Okay.
feedback on that to see if it makes the right fit or not.
Yeah,
Okay.
great.
Thank
And
you.
if I could make just one quick point, and that's that the town is pretty close to build out. And the number of subdivisions we're gonna see, pick an arbitrary number like 5, pretty limited. There's not that much land that's developable at this point. So if that's what we're gonna use to achieve our goal of always maintaining 10%, I'm afraid that's not gonna work.
Thank you, George.
What concerned me about it is that if once you adopt the 40R, it bypasses the town. So the developers come in and they say, okay, we're going to give you 25% affordable, and then they can pretty much.
But I think that's the question that
Right.
we have to ask the land specialist, because we're not certain. It may not be that they drive it like a 40B. It may be community-based, as Rick had said. So we're going to table it. Let's so we can get through some more.
I think the next one was just a revision for clarity and keep it a little bit more broad and review the existing zoning bylaw for the needed revisions to strengthen protection of natural resources. And that's just a blanket review of the bylaw to ensure that it supports the protection of natural resources and doesn't contradict or promote the development of such resources.
Okay, so any concerns of us moving forward? Okay, go ahead.
All right, the next one was just a slight addition. So in addition to just identifying the flood hazards and updating land use tools to better define the objectives related to flood hazards and in relationship to development, I forget who it was who added it, but conserve through purchase or restriction properties that would expand and improve flood control and hazard mitigation.
Everybody okay? Keep on going, Donnie.
So the following was submitted new additions. Discourage development in environmentally sensitive areas, including land that provides wildlife habitat or groundwater recharge. I think, Jeffrey, you had a comment on this. with
Yeah.
respect to-
I guess the comment for some of these, as we were looking through them, is just to recognize that some of these things are already regulated and there's certain state, requirements about what you're doing in these environmentally sensitive areas and no-build areas and setbacks to wetlands and those things too. So I guess the idea of discouraging development in these sensitive areas that might be regulated anyway, it just made me realize, what are you trying to achieve with this goal if it's already regulated somewhere else? Is it in addition to? Is it a stricter standard? It would be good to clarify what the intent is for some of this stuff.
That was me again. I added the next two, and it did come from, I just read, like I said, I read the housing master plan for Hudson and Shrewsbury, and I saw a couple things that they had that I really liked. So I figured I'd add them as a comment and just see what the group thought, what you thought. They just stood out to me like, oh, that sounds pretty good, so maybe we need something like that. But I didn't go as far as research it to know that the state already regulated that.
Well, I would say too that, depending on the state's regulation is not the best. I mean, it's better for the towns to bolster those
That's right.
and, to have that goal, if that is a goal of the town,
So, for example, some towns can write their own bylaw that'll take a standard that's meant to be a buffer zone, for example, and extend that to make it extra protection around that too. You'd want to go back and look at your local bylaws to see if you're already doing those things or not. And
Yeah,
maybe
we
they'll-
have those in conservation. I mean, we have 30-foot no disturbs and, kind of all that set aside in the conservation regs, which we're actually updating right now to add more protection to them. So, I mean, I think conservation controls that. I mean, that said, I don't see it being a bad thing to just kind of restate it in here.
Which again, the way in which we, or do we do something like the reviewing of the
Right.
existing
Yeah.
zoning bylaws? The way in which we can discourage this development or manage it is through our conservation bylaws, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean,
I think what Freddie, are you saying that there was a bit of a redundancy in reviewing the bylaws kind of
no,
as a way to encourage,
No, I think-
discourage?
we're talking earlier about reviewing zoning bylaws. The Conservation Commission, their bylaws should also be part of how we manage our land use. Right, Mark?
It struck me that this is highly incorporated in the fourth bullet, which is to review the bylaws, but not with a goal, which is in this bullet of a result of discouraging development. An awful lot of industrial zone land is in the aquifer protection zone. This would suggest that you want to discourage development of your industrial land, therefore, in some fashion, and I think that gets the cart before the horse before you review what you already have in place.
Okay, so,
So the sense is, your protected is a little bit too strong to be coming out on that.
I think whatever analysis is sought here is part and parcel of the fourth bullet, reviewing the bylaw for needed revisions to strengthen protections.
right.
I don't see this different.
Could even be review existing zoning bylaw and conservation commission regulations.
Right.
Almost kind of tied into one bullet.
Okay, all right, okay. All right,
So
so,
having said that, then the people be in agreement to delete this particular recommendation.
and add Conservation Commission regulations to the fourth one? Okay, great. While Donnie's typing, the next one is where feasible, acquire lands that contribute to the quality and diversity of wildlife habitat or the protection of the town's drinking water supply.
I mean, you said you
Yeah,
prefer
so I
that.
put that in too, because I saw it in Shrewsbury and Hudson. I just wanted to do, I don't remember which one it was. And our land use goal was to prioritize the preservation of valuable natural land, so I thought that fit in with that goal. I didn't see it as hurting either
Not a
way.
bad, not a bad recommendation, right? I mean, we're trying to
No, the town,
prioritize and preserve valuable natural and open spaces.
the town doesn't have a drinking water supply.
Yeah.
We still have wells.
Right now.
Yeah, that,
Yeah.
They're not operational.
the,
Oh, I know,
They-
but
they
they
won't
say
be.
they might keep them for reserve if they ever needed it.
No.
No.
Only for the
At some
Why
point,
would
the
you want
town
to
has to make, the town has to make a decision that it's either, because there's so many regulations and testing, even if you take your wells offline, the testing, I mean, Justin would know more about this than me, but, you know, the testing that the town has to do, in the event that they did have to be brought back online. So at some point, in the very near future, the town has to make the decision, either we're staying with MWRA water or we're not. And then that's gonna impact what we further do in-house about, you know, our groundwater protection overlay bylaw that we have today.
Okay.
We also have a great source of water, which we're fortunate to have.
Right.
Extremely rare that a
Correct.
community can get
Unlimited
100% of their
supply.
water, right, from the MWRA.
This doesn't address, maybe it's not here, but wastewater, does it? Is that somewhere else? Somewhere else.
All right, so, I mean, there's no harm in leaving it if we end up not having town drinking water, but if we take it out, we're eliminating our opportunity to say we want to protect it.
Isn't this addressed though? I thought we, and again, I'm a fan of simplicity. I understand we want to put details in here, but, you know, didn't we already address that with the addendum we just put in with the conservation bylaws, you know? I mean, to me, that's really what this becomes, is a land conservation or environmental issue, correct?
No, it's very different. I would say that this is more of a recommendation for the Open Space Committee to be looking at acquiring lands that, you know, protect wildlife habitat. I would say it would make more sense here. It said, and protection of water quality rather than the town's drinking water supply.
Okay.
Because that's sort of overarching, that's.
Right.
That's been.
Very good, that's very
I have a
good.
question though, maybe semantics, maybe not. But when I read the main point that we're looking at here, it's prioritize the preservation of open spaces. To what extent is acquisition a big portion of that or a small portion of that? Is acquisition actually part of the way that we would preserve? Because there's a financial implication here, and I don't know if this is the right spot for that or the intent. Because we can preserve without acquiring in the way that the town is governed and land is approved. So that's why I'm saying it might just be language, but.
I think there's an assumption here that some of our valuable natural open space is privately owned right now, and could be a subject of acquisition in the future, as the Open Space Committee has done, so.
But we think that's something that would fall under the way that would prioritize preservation of open space. That's what you're, okay.
Your concern is with the word acquire,
Uh-huh.
so if we were to phrase that as protect rather than acquire, would that be more general?
I just, because I don't like personally know the sort of financial trajectory of what comes out of this plan and how that impacts committees, like who has the funds to acquire? I mean, we all know that when you get through this, you're challenged to do everything that you list. And so I'm a little bit concerned about words that commit funding or imply funding.
Well,
It would have to be approved by town meeting,
it
rather
would
than.
have to be approved by town meeting,
CDC.
but it would also be probably through the Community Preservation Act.
Okay.
I'm not against the
Yeah.
concept of
Maybe
what it does.
it would be
Right.
helpful if it said where feasible, protect through acquisition or otherwise.
But we're already, the goal is to preserve. So how are we gonna preserve land? One of those ways is to acquire.
Correct.
And that's what this is saying. I think to Ashley's point, changing the town's drinking water supply to the town's
Water quality.
water quality, makes sense. But,
It also, it would strike, well, I think the word "or" is not the right word here, because you're talking about two completely different things. Diversity of wildlife habitat or the town's drinking supply. I mean, they don't go together. Yeah.
To the end instead of.
Yeah,
But wildlife habitat and
where feasible, acquire the lands for either or. I mean, so and would work.
Well, the town doesn't have to purchase to protect.
Right.
I mean, there's groups like Sudbury Valley that purchased John Sunder's property.
Right,
And that's protected,
and it's acquiring still.
and they got
yeah.
the tax break, and we get the benefit of those lovely fields.
The town bought that, actually.
Yeah.
How about preserve?
That's part of our goal. We're already, the goal is to preserve. How are we gonna do it? Are we doing it by acquiring land?
Because we're in open space, and that's what they do. They look
Right.
for properties, and they want to look for properties that
Right.
are best for water.
If you want to make sure it's protected, that's really the only way.
That's one, yeah, own it, right. And to
Otherwise-
George's point, the CPA, the CPC money is one of the ways in which we achieve this recommendation. All right, so to recap,
So is there any burning desire to drop this, or can we just leave it changing order, quantity of supply to quality?
and changing the order to an end.
If I might just throw out a quick option, just hearing the difference between acquire versus protect and preserve and so forth. You might put in here where feasible, seek actions that contribute to the quality and diversity of that are contributing to that. So it might be that you acquire it, it might be that you do protection of the land, it might be that you preserve things or work with different organizations. I don't necessarily, it has to be acquiring the land. That's, I think, one of the distinctions here.
All right, so why don't you wordsmith that offline and we'll table, we'll have that in a draft form instead of a draft form. So otherwise, we're never gonna get through anything. Okay, sorry.
And the next one, I think this was it yours? Amy,
That was
as
me,
well?
Terry, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I thought this was, I thought you raised a good story, not a story, but a fact that, and a concern about, how stormwater maintenance plans, sort of get going, and part of this review process, and then where does it go from there? So, and then maybe you can explain this a little bit more, but the recommendation itself, monitor stormwater maintenance plans created for the operations and maintenance phase of real estate developments.
And that goes back, and George knows too, from the beginning of
Oh,
time.
boy.
He can explain it better than me. Do you want mine, George, or do you want me to?
No, I'll be happy to jump in on this one. A lot of times, and it's not necessarily residential subdivisions, it's most often we see this in the industrial and commercial area where someone comes before either the planning board or the zoning board of appeals, and their engineer comes in with a nice fancy operation and maintenance plan, which is 100 pages long and has all these do's and don'ts. And it says that they are to have the property tested every year to ensure that they're still in complete compliance and submit the testing results to the town. No one does it, and the town doesn't require it. And 20, 30 years later, when someone decides they want to put a new use on this property, that's when someone comes in and says, oh gosh, we didn't even know we were supposed to do this, I'm sorry. But please let us sell to these guys, and they have a great operation and maintenance plan, which is even better. And then that doesn't get implemented either, because there's no way the town follows up on these things. It's not a hard thing to
It's more
do.
important as MS4 goes into play too, that private real
MS4?
estate developments are, maintaining their stormwater before it comes into the town system, and then, the town's held liable for it. So, I mean, I think it's a good point. I wonder, do we have a stormwater bylaw?
No, not yet. But if I certainly don't disagree with George, because we've talked a lot about this on the planning board. But I think that this is not the correct place for this. These stormwater reports are about, the stormwater reports that we do get and that we do require, and we do get some, but are for developments. And again, we're in the land use category about protecting open space. So I don't see the connection at all between the goal and the recommendation. I think that, if you want to make, something about, stormwater management that for developed parcels, it doesn't belong in this category.
Go in infrastructure?
Probably more in infrastructure, but I just don't see the connection between protecting our open spaces.
Right.
Well, I develop a stormwater bylaw first for the town, that then we can actually,
Yeah, and there, I mean, we're part of the whole stormwater coalition, and, you know, I know the DPW was
That's
working
for,
on it.
but you'll need bylaw regulations to require stormwater reports on every development. Right now, the state's regs only require them if you're within 100 feet of a wetland. So you actually don't need to technically file a stormwater report unless you're within conservation jurisdiction. So you need a stormwater bylaw to sink some teeth into, and then you might want to think of like an O&M, the stormwater O&M covenant or something that gets recorded with the property that stays with the deed and everything too. So there's ways that I've seen other towns do it that tend to work pretty nicely, but a lot of those tend to have some kind of stormwater bylaw that you can sink your teeth into. So it might, I think, probably better suited in the infrastructure section, but also,
Well,
you know.
to develop stormwater bylaws as opposed to the monitoring it. Let's-
Yeah, and that could just be an
develop
outcome
some.
of the bylaw.
Right,
Yeah.
okay, so will you guys move that into infrastructure in a different form?
Okay, are we replacing that with the need to develop the stormwater bylaw?
Yeah, it all goes hand in hand.
No, all right, so we're gonna, so Donnie's question is, are we going to just move this into infrastructure or replace it with develop stormwater bylaws so that we can actually have teeth in this?
Well, there's a lot going on that I'm just not knowledgeable to speak on, that the DPW is working on with stormwater. So let me get some background.
All right, we're gonna take it out of land use and table it in its wording for infrastructure.
Yeah, and that's a good point about the inReach that's going to be required for, these recommendations, to understand what departments are working on, that unbeknownst to us, unbeknownst to the rest of the town. The last one under this goal, maintain the town's open space fund to ensure resources are available to protect open space as opportunities arise.
No question. Everybody okay with that? Okay. Ooh, okay.
Land use goal 2.
Well, actually, I'm sorry. It's not called the open space fund. If we're really, and I know we're still in the draft form, but if we call it the conservation fund. And I should have said that weeks ago to you, but.
That's an easy fix, guys.
Yeah.
The next land use goal related to promoting and pleasing a welcoming appearance in downtown. So the first one was wordsmith a little bit, and then there's a appended language that covered a village district zone. I think somebody had some notes on this of where it's been done before within the region.
I would love some information on what that is for the recommendation.
That was me too, because I just went to a class on the village district bylaw.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, a lot of these, because they're planning board things, that's why I had a lot of comments for the first two sections, but not a lot on the others. So, I actually was gonna ask to change that sentence tonight to investigate village districts in the downtown to promote and support walkability. Because what came out of the village district bylaw class I went to, and I can give the sheet to everybody, is among the village district bylaw includes complete streets, sidewalks, and it talked about ways to make your downtown walkable and pedestrian friendly. And they were all different. I have a whole page on ways. So that's why I thought just leave it open as investigate village district in downtown to promote and support walkability, because these were more general than specific, but if anybody wants, I can share a page of what the village district bylaw included.
Well, the current additional wording is to include a potential village district zone. At this point, does anybody have any real concerns about just the potential? Mark?
My concern relates that village district is defined in any community that develops something they call a village district. It doesn't have its own meaning to it. If what Amy's comment is it's a two-headed thing that is both zoning, but it's also public infrastructure. When you start talking about sidewalks and the like, that's outside of zoning to a great degree, particularly in downtown. then maybe that's another bullet to talk about, somehow evaluating public improvements in the downtown zone or something. But a village district is different in Cohasset than it is in Northampton.
Yeah, I would say too, either take out the words village district or find a way to better define it, because Foxborough is just right now dealing with a village district recommendation in their master plan that they're using to allow for industrial development. So I don't think that's what we want.
No, I'm pretty sure that's not what they'd be
So
looking for.
it should be interpreted however, the future
Okay,
players want to interpret it.
all right.
Well, the recommendation talks about, without including those words, it talks about promoting and supporting walkability, which I think is the whole idea of that one. So probably, we're not exactly sure how the village district would work, it might make sense to just delete those words and just enter walkability.
Right. And it was more than mixed use, I guess that's what I was getting to, too. If you take out, okay, zoning that are promote walkability.
But if we're looking 20 years ahead, the village district zone change in 20 years. We're looking at it right now.
I mean, it's just the latest buzz
Right, but
phrase.
I think the term probably is valid to leave in there because it's gonna evolve in 20
Well,
years.
couldn't we have a downtown district? To Mark's point, couldn't we just call it a downtown district?
I think your point's well taken. You want to have some type of district where we have identified as a center where you can walk, you can participate, you can shop.
That's the downtown.
Yeah, maybe just.
We haven't done a good job defining the downtown.
I guess when I went to this class, it was actually, they have village district bylaws. And they said it's an element in the master plan, they specifically talked about that. But there are different elements under the village district bylaw that the planning board can decide what they want to do, like complete streets, sidewalks, or they talk about architectural and landscaping standards, which we do talk about later.
I have to agree with Kathy, in 5 years, no one's going to use this term. It's fully as a buzzword.
Yeah, I think we should tie it into those other recommendations that talk about downtown.
Yeah.
What we want with downtown.
Just as a reminder, land use goal number 2, if you go back up, Donnie, I mean, the whole idea of that is about enhancing the downtown by doing all of the actions that fall beneath it. So this is just one about updating the zoning. There's many others that are sprinkled throughout here too that might address more of the placemaking, the physical infrastructure, some of the other controls. So this was meant to be the zoning part of it as well. And we try to keep it a little bit generic in terms of tying it to walkability and so forth, versus trying to over-describe what it is in this.
And I think along with that, then smart growth should stay in there, because that's the same thing. You're saying we should do smart growth, but that's very specific too.
Right,
So
well, that
we're
I
not
think
gonna
we,
be, oh, I know.
right, no, I think we tabled smart growth, and on this one, how about we leave out the village and go through the other pieces to Jeffrey's point that may have recommendations that are more specific about what we want to see and what will eventually maybe someday be a downtown, and whether those words are actually needed. Right, because remember, this is draft, so we need to try to get through it and, take out the OMGs that we don't want, or the OMGs that we must have, and then, whittle it down after we get through the public input as well.
When I look at the third item, it should be the first item, which is to do the study, the design study of what the downtown should be.
Okay,
Then
so
everything
Mark
seems
has
to.
us going to the next one, is that okay with you?
No,
Okay.
the second one.
The second and the third need to be combined somehow.
Okay, so
Yeah,
let's
to me that's the
let's
more
send it back
important.
to
We need.
Donnie. Let's send it back to Donnie
All
to
right.
bring us into those two.
Exactly right.
Norm is better than I am at trying to keep us moving.
So the next recommendation is to conduct a visual preference survey with you to determine what kinds of developments it prefers downtown and update the town zoning bylaw to accommodate these preferred development types. I'll follow that with the second one, or the third, the second one. Conduct a design study of downtown to help focus ideas and develop a clear vision for the area. At a minimum, this study should address building design guidelines, connectivity to nearby uses such as town hall, town common, library, Essex Park, streetscape improvements, wayfinding, historic preservation. So I think the design study, I think the intent here is the design study covers a little bit more than the visual preference study, but I know that Jeffrey has some thoughts on the visual preference study and probably the design design study as well.
I think they do kind of work hand in hand, where we made that comment as well, but the idea is trying to define what you're looking for. There's character elements to it, and there's like the ingredients that set up the whole framework of downtown, which give me a lot of contributing elements about walkability, signage, wayfinding, all those things too. So the goal of those two are trying to get you a better vision of what you want, and then really the first one is like start to get it into your zoning and make it actionable things. So.
The first one can inform the second.
There's a question about whether or not this would be performed during the master plan.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
There was a question as to whether or not a visual preference study would be conducted as part of the master plan.
I mean, like if we do that in our process right now. Yeah, if we can set up our next survey, that if you wanted to get a little bit of a head start on these things, we can say one of the recommendations is going to explore maybe a more in-depth downtown study and visual preference study, but to queue that up, we can do a mini version of that study now to figure out what the parameters that would go into that recommendation, and maybe bracket it a little bit as well. So
Okay.
that's how
Everybody
it's
sounds-
What does pleasing and welcoming mean?
That's a good question. It's subjective, isn't it?
Well, maybe, I think we just need to talk about that, find out whether there are criteria that transcend our subjective experience of an objective reality. You know, I don't want to break it into, this inside, outside.
I think
Yeah, where are those terms?
Where is that?
Where are pleasing and welcoming?
Well, the LU2, enhance downtown promoting pleasing and welcoming appearance.
right.
So that is tied in with the design guidelines and the visual preference survey.
I think the fact that it's a goal, I don't think you have to fully define it within the goal. It's the actions that are leading towards what you want to do about it, right? So doing a visual preference survey will help you define what you like and what you don't like. So the goal is to actually make it nice appearance, sense of place, those things as a goal. How you do it, I think it falls underneath it.
Now, I don't know if I'd want to submit all the criteria to a popularity contest. Because I hate shutters, as you all know, but everybody loves them, fake shutters.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I think that it's tough, the concept for me is tough of a visual preference survey. First of all, I think the language is confusing here because visual preference survey to determine what kinds of development. So in my head, with that phrase, I'm thinking that kinds refers to different aesthetics, right? But then the second half of that sentence really is about development types. So is the survey getting people's preference for an aesthetic or development type? My guess is it's the first. But even with that, I'm having trouble visualizing a visual preference survey that's going to address the diversity of the residents. I mean, you have to get input somehow, but I'm just curious, do you have experience with a visual preference survey?
Yes, I think, keep in mind that these things are outreach tools when you're updating your zoning bylaws to help you get some parameters that you can put in there. And keep in mind that zoning is not going to prescribe everything, right? So it's helping you frame a zoning-related bylaw that will have inputs to it. So the preference survey usually have things around scale, textures, setback, mixed uses, single uses. In zoning, you cannot regulate the architectural character of it, so it really would not be the architectural side of it as well. It might show up in design guidelines versus in the actual regulations for zoning bylaws. So it's just trying to help you get a feel for what you want to do in your downtown. So it's one of many conversation methods, but that's all it really is.
No, thank you, and that helps me understand the intent of it.
Yeah.
But I think the wording doesn't give it justice to what you just said.
Okay, Norm?
We need to define what downtown is sooner than later. Is it just Route 20? My home is on Whitney Street. Am I part of downtown?
Right.
The Summer Street, School Street area, that's a whole neighborhood. Is that downtown?
Right.
We need to really define it because we don't, what we would do on Route 20 and what we would do in these other small neighborhoods would be totally different.
Right, but I don't think that that's for us. That would be one of the action steps.
But if
to
there's nothing,
achieve the goal.
but I'd like to see a line item that says define downtown. That's what I'm looking
That would be
for.
permanent, that part of this process to create some sort of map that outlines areas.
Well, I mean, I just don't.
I just haven't seen it yet, and I haven't seen it.
Okay,
That's
so
all.
just so the the
Let's say
two
it's-
recommendations, on the second page, that one says conduct a visual preference, and the next one is conduct a design study. It sounds like we want to blend those together in some form or fashion, and that at our next public meeting, there'll be a mini survey, give us a sense of what a visual preference study would be like. Does that sound right?
That's right, we can do a small sampling of what that is and
Okay.
explain how that could further inform.
But I
And to your point, Norm, goal ED1
Thank you.
is define downtown use.
Oh,
Okay, we're not gonna get to the E's if we can't get through the L's.
I knew we went through
That's
this,
all right.
'cause I was hoping we weren't
All right,
going to go
I'm
through the
sorry.
definition of downtown again.
Thank you for our.
Okay. All right, so is everybody okay with us, with that idea of blending those two, for the next version of our draft?
Sure, yeah.
And, having some type of, mini survey, give us a flavor of that at our public meeting.
I just had a question. If we're gonna do the mini version of the survey at the next meeting, can we just send out the questions in advance? So maybe we can have input that, oh yeah, that's what we're looking for, or no, that's not what we're looking for. Because there were some points in the first survey where people were confused by the questions, or it wasn't what we were looking for.
Well, I think though a visual preference survey has its own, there are specific things that you're gonna ask?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
We do have design guidelines for buildings
In the deck.
Which
in the design review committee, which covers all commercial, industrial, and duplexes. So there's a document that the town has already that we can refer to.
Okay, well, that might be helpful to you all when you're creating the questions. Okay, all right, so Kathy, can you make sure that Donnie and Jeffrey get the design committee bylaws? Okay, Rex?
And I guess one of the questions at the last planning board meeting we discussed was, as part of the next survey, during this master plan, we talked about variety of housing. And the questions were, well, when you say variety of housing, do you mean colonial versus split versus Cape? Or do you mean duplex versus multifamily? So we thought those are questions that had to be asked and clarified, because maybe it was the first survey, we asked if people would like to see a variety of housing, but the people we talked to had all different opinions of what they thought the variety of housing meant.
Did anybody here think it meant whether it was a gambrel or a ranch, or did you think it was condo, multifamily,
Right.
single family?
Yeah,
Okay, all right, so Lisa.
Affordability,
Right.
range,
Okay,
as well as massing. Numbers.
all right, okay, all right, so make sure that we also thought we were on the same page. But Justin.
Sorry, I don't want to belabor this one anymore, but just, if we're gonna combine these, can we do something with the whole statement at a minimum, the study should address building design guidelines, like, we're stating things in there at a minimum, but we're not talking about lighting, landscaping, transportation needs, like, there's a whole lot of minimums I think that this should address, that we could just go on and on and on, so. It's hard to just define, a few things where I think it needs to encompass a lot more than that.
And I think to Justin's point there, this might be a good example where we try to add all this detail into it, it really still doesn't suffice the need for it. So sometimes it's better to say, like, you need to do a downtown study, you need to do one of these, and it'll be known, like, when you do them. There's industry standards on how you do that, right? So try to list everything that goes into it now, I'm sure you'll get a few that wrong.
All right, so that's it. All right, so combine them, pare them down. Okay.
I think part of the struggle here is when you start to get to some of the recommendations on the ED1, whether they belong here or not. I mean, the whole idea of a downtown study is a specific recommendation on the ED1. So I don't know if they're really different in fashion. I don't know if you can read them separately, because somebody said we talk about the same thing.
Right, okay. All right, well, it is in a work in progress for these two. When we get to the ED, we can always go back to it and see what we think, whether it's redundant or better placed there.
Correct. And it's also very common, just because this will come up again, that there might be a land use recommendation that tries to achieve a certain goal, and an economic development recommendation that achieves a goal, and these would be cross-referenced in our implementation chapter. They would say, in concert with LU number 2, do ED number whatever, and tie the two together. because they're trying to meet different goals. But you're picking up on a really good point. We have to cross-reference them if they stay in their achievement goals.
Okay, great, okay, good.
My point more to the group was, this isn't the last bite in downtown.
No.
So,
There you go.
But remember too,
The last one.
there
There you
were,
go.
yeah, there were
Alright.
3 things that people were interested in: downtown, downtown, and downtown. So having it in there several times probably isn't bad.
All right, good, Donnie.
Okay, so the next one was a bit of wordsmithing. Encourage infill development within downtown that fits the area's vision as identified through the previously mentioned design study.
I don't think that needs to be in there at all, so.
I was, yeah, probably whatever's coming out of that study would inform.
Yeah.
yeah.
And also,
Simplicity?
you know, it might just be semantics, but I mean, the area doesn't have a vision. It would be I mean, if you're gonna keep something in there, it would be, you know, what the town's vision of that is.
Becoming
but-
redundant.
We're gonna do a John Cogswell, simplify.
Yeah, I don't.
Okay with that? All right, thank you. Okay, good, Don.
Strengthen and preserve the remaining historical aspects of Northborough's downtown. Review the existing bylaws to ensure that these features remain.
I think we're already reviewing the existing, residential resources.
What does strengthen mean in that context?
Well, what if we just take out that line and just review the existing zoning bylaws to ensure that the preservation of the remaining historical aspects?
You got a lot of reviewing of the zoning in here. I don't know how many times you have to say that.
Well, we have to say it completely, or we're saying it by area. The other one was review to protect natural resources. This would be to review to.
Except that, I don't see where historic preservation is part of zoning. I mean, that may be part of design guidelines, maybe someplace else, but the zoning isn't going to talk about the historic nature of the buildings. It's
Right.
about
Are there
size,
zones?
shape, and setbacks.
Well, I think that this was an ad by the steering committee, and I think there was some contextual information that was added with respect to infrastructure, not necessarily the buildings or the structures, but more of the physical layout and the infrastructure that are associated with downtown that make it historical. I don't remember quite who added this, but
I think it was me, yeah, but it was before, I think Norm added all the other historical stuff.
Okay.
But I took this from another town too, and I'm on the planning board, as I said, and Main Street Residential is the group of houses from Habitat in the library, and it goes down to Stone's Motorcycle Shop. And in the past, that whole Main Street Residential, if it was going to be tear downs and duplexes, they had to be conversions, they couldn't be torn down. But the way our bylaw is now, they can be torn down. So I feel like to preserve those homes that the people like to see, it should go back to looking into maybe it being a conversion to multifamily, like they have a lot down there, then versus a tear down. So I guess that's where the zoning comes into play.
But if you make it too difficult, there'll be fall down instead of tear down.
Well, they could still tear it down and put down a one-family home. They could rebuild what they have, but what people do is they go in there, they can put in one of those modern or, and I don't know how they're
She's
gonna
not
design
saying
it.
what to do, you're saying review and make sure that we have stronger bylaws that protect historic resources as much as possible, or feasible, right? In our view.
But I think to Rick's point, that, zoning doesn't preserve the historical aspect of something. Zoning just is all about land use, what you can do at that space.
Well, what can
So
we
it's,
recommend here
You need a historic district.
to achieve the same thing?
It comes up later.
Yeah, I think we have, there's a whole historic resource section.
It's a
to-
different authority.
NCH2 is essentially almost that same statement.
They haven't added that at the same time we added.
Oh,
okay.
So we've got it, I think we've got it covered in the
Should we just
historic.
take it out?
All right,
Take it
want
out.
to take it out?
Take it out of here, and that works, do it historic.
Okay, all right, and the last one?
Investigate density bonuses and/or density transfer credits in the town zoning bylaw that allow reasonably higher densities in downtown in exchange for public benefits such as affordable housing or affordable housing submission of funds to the town, and the provision of open space or the fees that would go toward the conservation, preservation, and other areas of town. And the idea here is just give developers a little bit more incentive to increase the density of their developments in exchange for all of these benefits that are mentioned within the recommendation. And I think it was flagged for further discussion, so.
Mark?
I think that the idea is density, because that at least relates, in the sense that it relates to creating that pleasing and welcoming appearance and a sense of community. That's fine, but I think when you start getting to affordability, that belongs in the housing. It's not part of, the quality of the housing downtown isn't driven by the income of the residents.
So would you, are you suggesting maybe delete everything after benefits in exchange for public benefits, or is this
I would put a period after downtown, as opposed to some trade-off. It leaves open the issue as to whether to create this downtown sense of community, you should have denser housing.
I don't think I put this in, but I think the intent here is sort of like the transfer of development bylaws. So you're giving the carrot so that the town gets some money in exchange to do some things that provide a public good. So, okay, you can bypass zoning and do some denser, put in some denser business development or residential development, but we're gonna have you put some money into a fund that can allow us to buy open space or create affordable housing.
That may be the end result, but if the goal is to create a downtown with a sense of community, then denser housing drives toward that goal. How you get it and some of the details of it belong either elsewhere in the master plan or the details of what you develop as to how to do it. But I think here it gets away from the goal that we're trying to drive to.
I would not agree that denser housing would allow us to achieve that more pleasing downtown. I mean, maybe it'll happen and it'll be part of making it more vibrant, but I don't think that's a goal. I don't think that's what we're all envisioning, but I don't know.
Oh, so to me, that is, I mean, you can't have a downtown if you don't have people living in close quarters. That's what
Yeah.
the downtown isn't 2 acre sprawling
Right.
lawns.
Agreed.
It's, you know, just look at the downtown, that's on the development, but.
But I agree with Mark's point. I think if you put a period after downtown, you're keeping the sense of what you want to do here, which is to explore the possibility of density bonuses in the zoning. All these things that come after it are things you could get, but there could be other things you could get also, so.
How do people feel about provide for, investigate, or explore, as Rick just said?
I think investigate is fine. I'm just
Okay.
saying, putting a period after downtown,
Okay.
I think gets to the point of what we want to do.
If I
I
may,
think it's assumed that we're going to get some public benefit for doing it. It'll just be determined each time what the public benefit is.
1 second.
if I may,
Donnie?
when we present these recommendations to the public, will the public understand what, you know, what the town is getting in exchange if you put the period after downtown? That was the rationale for including some of the examples of public benefit, just so when, you know, it is presented in front of the community, they don't get overwhelmed by this, what is a density bonus or what is a density transfer credit, but, you know, they kind of see, yes, they can build at higher densities, but the town is getting funds for, you know, affordable housing or, you know, the acquisition of conservation lands, things like that. So that just for a little bit of context, that's why
I guess that makes sense. I guess that makes sense.
I agree that leaving it the way it is. So I didn't have this one, believe it or not. This one was already in there, and I think maybe the consultants added it because I have read it in all the other towns I read their master plans. When they provide the density bonuses and credits, the towns did get something in return.
Okay,
I would say put in the period after public benefits. I mean, then you don't.
I think so. I agree with that actually too, because I think you could use that money for sidewalks on Whitney Street, or you could use it for, you know, anything that really provides a public benefit, not specific to housing or open space.
All right, so that's a compromise between the period at downtown and the full sentence. And that's for the public's benefit?
Is there, somebody asked a question about, is the town, are people in the town going to understand what density, what we're driving at there? So I'm a big proponent of the fact that I think for downtown to be vibrant, it has to have a community of its own. It needs to be a neighborhood, right? So how you do that is going to require some level of density. So I don't know whether, to create a community needs to be put in here to kind of, imply that intent. Because I think I saw a real, sort of bifurcation in the view in the town of, yes, I want affordability, oh, I don't want density. So I think there's a rub there. So I think if we're gonna use density, again, my bias would be to just sort of describe what we're trying to achieve with that density, right? Which is, again, to try and create a community in the downtown area.
Okay,
I
do you
think-
think it works with that in
Yeah,
there?
and also just a reminder that can go back to the goal, so if we take your thought just a
Right.
minute and we scroll back up to the goal,
Yeah.
values number 2, it's about trying to make it this
Yeah, yeah.
downtown go-to vibrant place, like the things you just mentioned as well,
Right.
so.
Communities right there.
Yeah.
Right, so
Right.
That's
So
why
mirroring those terms in these is
In-
probably not a bad thing. Right, gotcha.
All right, great, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Moving on.
The next one was untouched, but for the benefit of everybody else on the steering committee. Develop a program to promote the planting and sustained growth of street trees, landscaping, and other green infrastructure in downtown in concert with the development and fostering of partnerships, including with the Northborough Garden Club. We received some early feedback from them in this process. As part of the program, undertake a tree inventory along with major corridors in town.
Ready
Go
to take
trees.
that? Okay, so done.
How does major corridors, I thought we were talking about downtown in that paragraph. Something?
I'm sorry.
Major corridors could be, all the way down to the end of Whitney Street, all the way down Church Street, but yet this particular category it's under is downtown. So it seems like that sentence is unnecessary.
Should we make it major corridor connected to downtown?
Connectors to the downtown, feeders to the downtown.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Can you say that again? Just to-
Connectors or feeders to the downtown area. I think those are the.
The next 3 were added by the steering committee. Take advantage of the Department of Housing and Community Development's Massachusetts Downtown Initiative that provides services and technical assistance to communities under revitalizing their downtown.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go one by one.
Great idea.
Okay. Evaluate the CPA historic preservation and affordable housing funding that can be used to support downtown enhancement.
You're here.
Why aren't these fitting under the whole section on economic development? I'm confused. We're talking about
Wait
downtown.
till we get to that section, Norm, then we can decide how to merge the 2 sections together if we want.
Okay,
I would,
because that's confusing me.
I would just make that sentence, evaluate how CPA funding, because it can be other, it can sort of be anything.
Right, because we could use open space
Yeah.
if we
so
wanted
you
to,
don't
yeah,
need to say
expand
all.
on the economy or something, yeah. Evaluate how CPA funding can be used. Good.
So this last one, I will preface it by saying the word unified, I think, came up in a couple of comments. Some were for it, some were against it, but open for discussion. Establish a unified facade program that downtown business owners agree upon and feel comfortable maintaining. Provide small grants or incentives at the outset to get business owners started.
What's a unified facade?
So I think that was one of the questions, was that should all of the businesses look alike? Should all of the signs look alike? Should all of the facades look alike? Or is it?
I think all the townspeople should look exactly the same.
I think the architect's corner does not think all the facades should look alike, just for the record.
No,
Not possible.
It's not the same necessarily, it's a similar, similar aesthetic.
Yeah, I don't think you need the word unified here. The whole idea is a facade program. That could, again, industry standards, when someone does that, they would know what that program is and what to infuse it in variety. Unified is misleading, I think.
Well, I'm not sure we're in a position to offer small grants and incentives either.
Right?
Yeah, I was gonna raise a question about that, was whether that really is maybe too specific. Because we don't, unless we identify where the small grants would come from, and who would run the program, and I know some towns do that,
Small
but,
to a $250,000 building versus small to a $10 million building.
Where there's many facade programs where they'll be established and they will define if you want to have loans or no loans or forgivable loans. So as part of defining that program, those questions would come up and you decide if it's applicable to you or not. So I don't think you have to state it at the back end.
Well, and do we have to actually, I mean, couldn't we just say establish a facade program for the downtown? Do we have to say that the owners only, well, I guess that we want them to be part of the decision process? Is that why they're
Maybe
part
that's
of
a
it?
better way to say
So,
it.
yeah,
That
so
they're part
that
of the
as
decision.
members
Or how about
of the
explore?
facade,
Explore a facade program?
With
where,
downtown
with membership,
business
with
owners.
part, in partnership with the business owners.
But we don't have the kind of downtown that you
Not
have a
yet.
facade program that
Not
would be
yet.
applicable to.
Yeah.
What are
Or
we
even
gonna make
the
it,
dens- we won't have
fix
the
up the
density
gas
of it.
stations?
We want the density.
Right, I mean, again, this is not for today, this is for the next 20 years.
But I thought the point was made that zoning doesn't affect aesthetic, right?
Right.
So where does that belong?
Well, if we could establish this facade program in partnership with the businesses downtown to create what we would like, whether it's, you know, no shutters or no green paint with big cocoa beans.
So how is this gonna work with designer music?
I think we've already got it as an effort. In an earlier,
Okay, sorry, Mark, go ahead,
in
sorry.
an earlier bullet, we've got an idea of developing building design guidelines for new construction moving forward.
Right.
So that suggests that this is only talking about existing
Correct.
structures.
Okay.
And if you deal with existing structures, the downtown does not afford itself to a facade program
Okay.
because there
Yep.
are too many different types of
I would
facades.
just
Okay.
strike it.
Okay, strike it.
Yeah.
And
Dave,
let it-
Putnam?
Well, no, I'm agreeing with Mark.
No.
I think it applies to existing buildings, and there's no rhyme or reason with the existing building. You'd just be chasing
Okay,
buildings.
all right. Everybody comfortable?
Now,
with
I have
this
a question
version of
though,
the
'cause
draft?
we must have some guidelines for new buildings.
Yeah,
We do.
yeah,
Because
that's- yeah.
CVS was built to look like a clapboard house.
Yeah.
It wasn't built with brick and stainless steel.
Yeah, that's right, yeah, there it is.
So
There's been design
Design
guidelines.
review committee killed us.
Okay. All right, so for this round of the draft, we're gonna strike this?
I don't
Okay.
think it's necessary.
Okay, there you go. Okay.
All right, moving on to the next land use goal, ensure North Borough's future land uses support its vision and establish community character. This one is just slightly wordsmith, but I'll read it out. Develop, codify, and enforce design standards and guidelines to ensure continuity between the existing visual community character and the New England architectural style. With new development and redevelopment, they should give specific focus to downtown, Route 20 and Route 9, and should be consistent with the findings of visual preference studies.
First thing, cross out Route 9, that doesn't make any sense to me either.
So that kind of was my question. Am I reading this correctly, that we're imposing the New England architectural style and development on Route 20 and Route 9?
Route 9 has nothing to do with Burlington architecture.
Well, it has some larger tracts that are subject to redevelopment. And I think for both of those sites, saying now how it's going to be architecturally designed is far too restrictive.
I also think that the point is supposed to be, like, our goal here has to do with community character, and I personally don't associate architectural style with community character. So I think we should strike the New England architectural character.
And we're not sure we're gonna do a visual preference survey, so we shouldn't be referencing that, the findings of it and what we're gonna adhere to.
Did you just, you said that, there's mentioned previously in a previous section that we want to establish design standards for downtown, right? So is this just taking that beyond downtown? Is that what this is?
Yeah, we're no longer in the downtown,
Right.
goal. We're in the new goal of
Yeah, that
all.
Future land use.
That seems
New land
impossible
use,
and
yeah.
unruly and.
That's,
Yes.
Okay,
Strike?
the whole thing?
But again, there are design guidelines today in place for Route 9, for the entire town, except for,
So should we review those?
Are they separate?
um,
Route 20 and Route
Is that the action?
No, it's just commercial, industrial, and duplex designs.
Yeah.
Regardless of what zone they're in.
and
It's
where
a
they're.
building design guideline.
All right, so let's remember, what this goal is to ensure Northborough's future land uses support its vision and establish community character. To Diana's point, our community character is not on Route 9, right? But everything else, I mean, we want,
Yeah.
what do we want Northborough to look like, right?
Perhaps we should just
What is Northborough's community character?
review this.
It's a suburban bedroom community, is how I see it.
Look,
That's the character.
Does anybody in this room like what we've seen?
Yeah, I think everybody wants it to be a bedroom suburban community.
No question about it,
I think in general though, that everybody, and not just this room, but everybody dismisses poor Route 9. And I think Route 9 has such potential if sewer is brought to Route 9. And I don't think that people should lose sight of that whether it happens in our lifetime or not, something could really happen to Route 9, our portion of Route 9, if sewer were expanded to Route 9. You would see a completely different development pattern than what's there. And would you not want to have control over that?
Yeah, I feel like from what you're saying, it sounds like we should not dictate that it's Route 20 and Route 9, and we should say review existing design standards and keep them in line with the visual preference survey or something along those lines.
Well,
we do that visual preference because we want to know what people want to see. We want to make sure that people are happy with what they see, and we want to make sure that these design standards are, changing with the times.
Some of the words that were added make it a little bit more severe than we want. If you go back to, if this is to ensure the future land uses to support its vision and establish community character, develop design standards and guidelines to balance the existing community character and the New England vernacular, or forget the community character with new development and redevelopment, and just stop there. I mean, that's really what we're looking for, right? We're looking to develop or maintain our design standards and guidelines to balance the existing community character and.
I'm not sure what this is trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
I mean, we already have design guidelines.
Right.
Yeah.
And by the way, just so everyone knows, we're in the process of writing the duplex design guidelines. They make room for more than the New England architectural style.
Right.
Yeah.
They accommodate modern architecture.
Mm.
So that's why I personally am going to advocate for things that leave that open.
It sounds a little bit like a national socialism.
Okay. And then I
Overarching
definitely think
style we must all adhere to.
all right.
Or like
In an effort to get through this, do people feel that
which is actually very pretty. I did
is
like this, so.
overarching, has value, should be tabled? What do people want to do with this?
How does this differ from the last one? Develop townwide guidelines for commercial industrial development or high quality design with attractive, considers building layouts related to adjacent uses, internal circulation. I mean, is that
I don't know, where are you reading?
the last?
The last
Oh. Okay.
Is that, I guess that's just for commercial and industrial?
Can you guys help me understand something? So, Mark, you were just joking about, sort of the pressure on the CVS building.
I wasn't joking.
You were reliving the pain of the CVS building. So the CVS building, to me, call it what you will, but it looks like it belongs in a town that's in New England, right? Okay. You wouldn't expect to see it in Chico, California. All right. So, but then just up the road, on the left, with the parking behind the building, is an absolute abomination that was put in. So, it is a question I have as a resident and a member of this group. How do we protect that? So I'm not opposed to modern architecture in an appropriate location, but how do we protect ourselves relative to that?
And modern architecture looks horrible in 20 years. We're all looking at the architecture from the 70s saying, oh my God, what were they
You don't like
thinking?
brutalism?
The
Come on.
strip mall, right? Brutalism, right? Now brutalism's coming back. But no, you know. if we
But
wanna
that's,
keep-
that is a subjective thing. However, I think, and you actually made this comment, we know a bad one when we see it. So I guess that's the only real question I have, and I'm almost asking this as a citizen, you know, is the planning board who deals with that? It's not a zoning issue, I guess, and there are guidelines, but who enforces the guidelines? Like, you got beat up, you know, or your client did for CBS.
But it's a better building than we started, okay? I mean, the process works, and
Yeah.
again, you know, my concern with
But
this is.
who's pushing, I guess,
Well, I mean, we have in the bylaw requirements for design review in certain parts of town with
Okay.
regard to where the parameters of that are stronger than in others. And if your concern with the downtown is create a sense of place, then architecture becomes critically important. I would suggest that architecture becomes less important and should be driven more by the owner,
Right.
who's gonna develop, by way of example, the Kimball Sand Gravel,
Right.
15 years from now. The
Right.
idea that you're gonna define now what that
Agreed.
architecture has to look like, I
Agreed.
think, it doesn't have any sense of place anyways.
Right, okay. So what you're saying to me is if we're gonna recommend things, it might be an expansion of where we want guidelines. Is that what I'm hearing? Because we have guidelines today relative to downtown? Is that?
For everywhere, yeah.
Building
It's
type, not
building type.
location.
Okay, what's the land use?
But you can have downtown design guidelines too.
We have
That's already in the
Because-
section.
We have commercial, right, and industrial and duplex, but
Right,
that's
and
not,
downtown is a commercial zone.
right.
So you have, I mean, and it strikes me, just kind of to bump this conversation up a little bit, the last one on this page is redundant, I'm sorry whoever put that in there, but again, we already have them. You know, they exist in town.
Right.
So you may not like those, and that's fine, so then that's maybe more the recommendation, that you want to, you know, keep current with the existing design guidelines, and, or,
Yeah, I guess
or,
that's
you
where
know,
I'm headed, Kathy, is
you
like,
know,
that's really the issue, just making sure that we're diligent in our ongoing review.
that they accomplish what, yeah.
Right.
Well, and maybe I'm just listening a lot, and I'll offer some context. So when we work with a lot of communities, when it comes to things like looking at their zoning, looking at their guidelines, do you have commercial standards? Are they building related versus site related? Do you have site plan review? All of those things. It usually comes down to recognizing that maybe some parts are not working in all locations of your community, right? So for example, if you have one set of standards and they apply to anything commercial, I'd ask you, are your commercial districts are your town all equal? Do you want them to be equal? Should the standards apply slightly different? So Route 9 versus Route 20 versus the downtown, should they be modified to anticipate different things that would be about building placement, setbacks, density, location of parking, curb cut access? You can start to tweak those to anticipate different objectives. And if you don't have them specific to Route 9, Route 20, and if you think if they're working right now, that's okay, maybe you go back and tweak them to be more effective in other locations, maybe. And if you feel that they're okay right now, maybe that's all right. Maybe look at them to make sure you can tweak them, but it's a question that we have for you. I think the first one on here and the last one to some extent is trying to get at that idea of how you establish those across your community, especially if Route 9 and Route 20 downtown are very different. That's what other communities have done.
So instead of develop, since we have them, can we say ongoing review of, something to recognize the fact that we have them, but if they get stale, we need to review them? And that's a way in which we can ensure, because what we think of our established community character is going to change. To Ashley's point, 40 years ago, strip malls were modern. So we're A-frame homes, right? So
I do like that it's referencing the visual preference survey, just because it gives a way for the community to weigh in on sort of their thoughts here. I don't know what the best way to tie that in, if we're not going to do a visual preference survey or what, but
we haven't, yeah.
So, but I think maybe that should be a note to think about how to tie that in here.
I agree with what the consultant just said about how every district is different. I think the downtown commercial is way different than Northborough Crossing.
Sure.
I think there should be design guidelines for downtown versus Northborough Crossing. I think it should be different. That's what, like, going back to the district bylaw and stuff, a lot of people designate their downtown and have different settings, different standards. I don't think they're all equal. And I think somehow it should be included in the master plan, but I don't.
So is that what it is then it's the sort of ongoing review with an eye towards, evaluating whether different areas of town need different guidelines, right? Or need to be, modified.
I think that's what we put in here, with special focus on the downtown Route 29 to realize
Right,
that there's
yeah,
probably some differences there.
So I think we're a little stuck here, and so why don't we look at, I'm going to look from the bottom up. And the one that's pink that says encourage high-quality redevelopment and infill of commercial areas, I think that is part of the last one, which is to develop townwide guidelines. Does anybody feel that we could maybe, chip away at this a little bit smaller and talk about whether that one needs to be in there? Is that different than in the last one, or is the last one incorporate that?
I guess I added the encourage high quality redevelopment and infill in commercial and industrial, just because at the beginning, when we first met with this committee, the consultants had ideas with how some of your industrial may become more than just trucking and warehouses. And they had ideas, but I wanted to hear what those ideas were. I don't know what they are, but I just put that there as a placekeeper because it knocked it off where it said high quality redevelopment. So there's more in there as a place setting to be able to talk about that. And I know the industrial is almost all built out over in Bartlett Street. I don't know how many places are left. And that might be a part of our master plan or part of the planning board too, is sit down, look at the town. How many big parcels are left to develop? And what do you see there? Like we talked about this as like an overview of the whole town, but how many spaces are really left?
Well, that's what I'm saying. The last one has in it, develop townwide guidelines to promote high-quality designs. Well, take out the tractors. For the commercial and industrial development, I don't see how that's different than encourage high-quality redevelopment. I mean, to me, those are the same thing, but I'm just trying to get us off the other ones because we seem to be stuck at the moment.
Well, the last one too, we have guidelines.
Okay.
We have design guidelines that the town has had, in place for years.
So we don't need to develop.
So, and I'm not sure we're stuck. I mean, in the sense that I think that first one, we just decided it's more about reviewing them actively and keeping that on our radar so that we don't, how many years has it been since we've had these conversations?
Yeah.
Right, this
So-
is not going to be edited for a long time, but it's very easy relative to change, I'm saying it's easier to change the design guidelines as we need to and leave this as something that references that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, all
Like,
right.
this is basically what it's saying. Hey, don't forget about, So I'm fine with that with the first section, and then the industrial, I agree, we combine those two, right?
All right. So we'll leave wordsmithing on the first one, or paring down. I mean, if you want to make suggestions on how to pare it down or reword it so it's not discounting the fact that we already have guidelines for review, I'm sure that Donnie and Jeffrey would be happy to get some more input. Again, this is a draft, and it's okay for them to be a draft of a draft, right? We just need to try to, get through some of them.
Well, the design guidelines are not going to guarantee high-quality design. They may raise the bottom feeders up a notch,
Right.
but it doesn't guarantee you're going to get quality. Like the building you pointed out,
Yeah.
where Boost Fitness was, that guy subverted the whole system. He jumped out of design review, started construction before he was approved.
Right.
So, and look what we got.
Right. So, yeah, and I'm not looking for guarantees in life. So I would say to you that, again, I think that's an easy fix. To Kathy's point, they already exist, the guidelines. So it's just a question of you guys can wordsmith it, continual review and awareness of the need to review, whatever it might be, to preserve the character, right? Or to preserve which is really the goal, right? It's
I think we can say, continue to review the current design standards for the town to ensure their applicability to diverse locations in the town, and to advance efforts that ensure the highest quality. I mean, I think we can make it more like an objective, you're gonna keep updating it,
Right.
look about its applicability, and up the standards as you go.
Okay.
Right, and that could be an ongoing.
All right.
Does that make sense?
Maybe someone could take the first one, the last one, over.
Yeah, I think the
You gotta
first and
combine
last,
them.
and to some extent, the second and last could be
Right.
rolled into
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
combine those two.
Do we need to talk about the middle of the sandwich?
Oh, yeah, now we do, yeah.
Fine.
Okay, so going back, so the second bullet, which is, looks like it was pretty much crossed out, some of it. So Donnie, I'll let you explain that one.
So, yeah, let me just, I don't want to lose this
All right.
comment here. So, the rephrased recommendation is to build greater awareness of Chapter 61 programs that provide tax breaks to owners of forest, agricultural, and recreational land and grow local participation in the program. There was a question amongst the steering committee with regard to the level of impact, how many properties within Northborough would qualify. This would require a little bit more investigation, but this was just a little bit of wordsmithing, and I think Ashley, you had the changes to this particular recommendation. So, do you have anything to add to that?
I'm just not sure what role the town plays in this, maybe open space, but, I mean, there aren't that many properties that would qualify, and I feel like most that do aren't enrolled, right? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, we just recently, you know, had 2 properties on Whitney Street enrolled in this program.
So what if we just did build greater awareness of Chapter 61 programs? How we do that, maybe it's through the open space.
I mean, it's a benign bullet point, I guess, as is, it's fine, but.
You might want to tell us
So
what
maybe-
chapter 61 is.
Maybe it's more of a feel-good bullet.
Yeah, right.
So that's part of the role of what we're doing is educating the public.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
that's like even with things like, just, sorry to go back on this thing, but CPA, you mentioned CPA, it's like, I could spell them out, these acronyms, 'cause people probably might not even
That's-
know
yeah,
what that is.
That's a very good point.
So, and even Chapter 61, I don't know if there's an opportunity to kind of put a little explanation in there. So again, in that role, I think it's important to state it there so people are aware that it's something that exists and they might speak up about to someone in town about, you know, accessing that.
So
Yeah, I mean, that kind of provides what it is. Is that enough?
I mean, the bullet does talk about providing tax breaks.
Right,
Yeah,
yes, thank you,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. Yeah.
If
So-
you just put a period at the end of recreational land.
No, I mean,
You can leave it at that.
yeah, leave it just starting it out with build instead of through enhance outreach and creation.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
So leaving it as it was reread.
As is.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. So the next 2 relate to agriculture. Create an agricultural commission to advocate for local farming, including community gardening throughout town. There was a suggestion for this to be removed. It was discussed before and rejected. There was some recommendation to invite local farmers to get their feedback on this. I think, Kathy, you had a little bit of context on that as well. In addition to the next one, make Northborough a right to farm community in support of remaining local farms. The planning board and the board of health previously explored this, but it didn't materialize. Town admin and the agricultural commission did not support.
Can I ask a question? Because I had brought up the right to farm thing in lowercase letters and in quotes, because I was responding to the Create Our Agricultural Commission, and I was thinking that was unnecessary because the state already has a strong right to farm principle embodied in the state law and regulations, and you have the Department of Agricultural Resources and the Farm Bureau, which really do probably more than enough in terms of advocacy. It wasn't clear to me what more we needed to do at the local level, because I think our existing farms enjoy a good deal of support through their farm stand operations and everything.
I think in terms of right to farm, communities usually, it's more of a show of support.
Is that an official designation?
It is an official
Oh, it is?
designation.
I
You put up a
didn't even know
sign
that.
and you take a vote at town meeting, and it's more of a show of support that you're gonna make sure that your regulations and bylaws are kind of doing what they can to support local farming. So I think it would be nice,
Does that
our
include-
local farmers are well supported, except for maybe a composting operation.
Composting? It was specific.
But,
As a supported activity.
if, Tugas, I don't see that ever happen, there's plenty of generations to take it over, or Davidian, but if for whatever reason it transferred and it became a bunch of little farms, whatever it may be, maybe
Yeah.
they would need a little more support, so I don't know.
Okay, I don't have any objection to this. I wasn't sure I completely understood it, and I wasn't sure if it was even a misinterpretation of the comment I submitted, so.
Okay. Everybody okay with that?
So we're gonna delete, create agro commission and leave, make the right to farm community.
Okay, does everybody hear that? Okay.
But Kathy had a comment that it didn't
We
pass
talked about
there
it at the
previously.
planning board already.
It's, there's just some, unique circumstances to Northborough, ongoing unique circumstances that have made it, maybe not the right environment to pursue this.
Doesn't have to be a short-term goal, it could be a midterm or a long-term goal.
We have some great farms.
So if you want to, if people want to leave in, the right to farm, I would say something more innocuous.
Not a designation.
Or
Or just,
consider,
or.
consider not becoming a right to farm community. I
Yeah,
mean, something like that.
yeah.
On certain parcels.
And
Once we're out of litigation,
Right.
Okay.
once we're through spending hundreds of
Okay,
thousands of dollars.
instead of making Northborough right to farm, we're going to explore, inquire,
Okay.
whatever.
And I think, I did the cross out of the ag commission because I felt like, nobody ever wanted to do it. The farmers in town said, no, we don't need it, but what if things did change in the future? I don't know.
Well, and I think probably under the right to farm, if I'm not,
You kind of have to have.
I think you have to create some sort of commission, actually, so I think it's,
So it's tied in.
yeah, so I think it's okay to keep out the agricultural commission.
So we're going to revise the right to farm and then remove the agricultural commission. So the last land use goal, we have about 10 minutes left.
And I'm going to ask if people have, if we go 9:15, is that all right with everyone? Just so we can wrap things up, so we can give this the time it needs.
So the last land use goal, continue to support and manage commercial development outside of downtown, particularly along Route 20 and Route 9, considering adjacent land use compatibility and transportation priorities. So the first one went untouched, consider land use planning and regional transportation, coordinate land use planning and regional transportation investments. Any comment on that one? The second one, consider the development of an overlay district for Route 20 and Route 9, and to tie it to the development application of design standards and guidelines mentioned under land use goal 3. So Kathy, you mentioned that the existing highway and business zone regulations apply. Does it need to be updated for the remaining areas of outside of Northborough Crossing?
It's what Donnie's referring to is presently in the zoning bylaw, there is a major commercial overlay development district. It's a mouthful, but, which basically is around the downtown crossing area, but it's not just downtown crossing. So I think, again, can it be, reviewed and enhanced? And sure, I'm sure there's different things that could be, added to the existing bylaw. So, again, we already have an overlay district, so maybe, instead of consider the development of, it's,
Or maybe it's
I
not
don't
needed.
continue to ways to explore the use of the bylaw or something, or
But it doesn't cover the Route 9, the area of Route 9.
it, Well, that business district goes out to Route 9.
It doesn't have all the root lines.
That's true, but as far as,
It has the Cloverland intersection. but
Yeah.
Not all.
that's true, so, yeah, so going east on Route 9, should Route 9 be included? Maybe it should be explored to be included or something.
So maybe evaluate the expansion of the overlay district to include Route 9 or something like that.
Yeah.
Great expansion.
Or evaluate possible expansion of the existing overlay district to Route 20.
All right.
Understand development potential and articulate future infrastructure needs by reviewing water sewer capacity, particularly along Route 9, and a steering committee member added Route 20. So this goes back to what Kathy was saying before about the development potential of Route 9 without, though it does not currently have sewer.
Okay. Everybody okay with that? Okay.
I think this one was the next two were added by the steering committee. Prohibit, restrict, or hazardous waste and solid waste facilities in town. Develop / explore stricter zoning against the uses that bring in pollutants and environmental hazards.
That's kind of
I always have my zoning hat on, I'm sorry, but I think we have to be careful about broad statements like this because you don't necessarily know, by saying this, you really don't identify or know what a hazardous waste, you certainly know what a solid waste facility is, but, a hazardous waste.
We can't have a nail salon in town.
I wonder that. Right, or a store that just sells paints, And then when you talk about, I'm sorry, I'm getting old and this light is killing me. But the stricter zoning against uses that bring in pollutants and environmental hazards. Well, again, a nail salon fits that description. And not to be extreme, but you just kind of have to look at this in the context of what it could really mean. It could have consequences that you don't really intend when you say something like this.
Well, it's kind of like if we want to expand development along Route 9 and Route 20, we need to have some place to put our solid waste, and Marlboro and Shrewsbury may not be willing to take it forever. So we wouldn't want to prohibit solid waste facilities in town.
I get that because I was trying to do a hazardous waste bylaw for this town meeting or next town meeting, because there are a lot of towns that have hazardous waste bylaws and they restrict it to industrial. And we do have a couple of hazardous waste facilities that were on commercial, near residentials, on groundwater, and I was just trying to match what other towns were doing and just try to have some sort of zoning to keep the hazardous waste into industrial areas, or that was my thinking behind it, because we went through a lot this year with a couple hazardous waste facilities that are in our commercial.
So maybe dental offices. Dental offices have.
Right, but I mean, these are,
Go to doctor's offices.
If you can define it to be a facility that accepts hazardous waste or transfer facility, maybe we can be more specific about.
But we already have the mechanism to do that, it's called our planning board. They
Right.
have
But these
the
are
authority to.
recommendations for our board, right?
Well, again, instead of prohibit and restrict, we could say something to the effect of,
investigate.
By special permit, or,
Well,
I think it needs to
They just have to
be,
then develop hazardous waste bylaws, which is what then the recommendation is.
Or investigate developing a hazardous waste
Strict
bylaw.
regulations as well as NFPA for hazardous waste. And they list them all, they list the quantities, how they're protected, how they're stored. So we don't really need to get into that.
But does it
covered.
hurt to expand, as we said earlier, what the state provides doesn't prohibit us from expanding our protections in town. Currently, there was a hazardous waste facility that the state was on top of, but it was close to residential. How did that happen? Special permit or development came in after, I don't know, but does it hurt to encourage hazardous waste bylaw and encourage hazardous waste facilities if they are allowed to be in industrial or away from residential.
So then again,
It's not.
exploring the
Yeah, I think
development.
it's
Exploring or
of-
investigating or something, because you could, yeah, I think that's what you need to do, because you could end up, the mosquito control company, they have hazardous waste. There's so many places that do, it's just kind of investigating and looking into
Matter
regulations.
of definition,
Most of
it's
the
hard to define
diabetics have
precisely
their
enough to exclude what you want to exclude.
Exactly. You have to nail down to, such specific chemicals and things which are used in a lot of different companies too.
There's really two different concepts embedded in this at the same time. One is the activity of using land for the purposes of either hazardous waste disposal or solid waste disposal. That's a particular land use in and of itself. And, from a large scale, you can decide you don't want to do that, and therefore you want to require that you're going to ship it to somebody else's town. It's going to go somewhere. If you want to say it doesn't go in your town, you wouldn't be the first one to do it. Once you start getting into trying to define how a business that's in a different business can use materials that meet the definition of hazardous waste of material, you're in a very difficult area.
You wouldn't have a doctor's office.
I don't think that's what this is trying to say.
I think it says both.
Yeah.
That's what
All right, so
It wasn't
how
both.
do we
I wrote it down
think,
in my hat.
we understand what the intent is, what do we think it needs to say to meet that intent?
I'm not going to
Something
mark.
like,
All right, well, Richard's gonna try it.
evaluate changes to the zoning bylaw to better manage uses of hazardous waste and
I wouldn't do that, so.
But doesn't the planning board approve?
Why doesn't that, that sounds good to me.
Not uses of hazardous waste, though, because and then that gets into the uses that business, business
the
uses.
idea would be that
There's
we
all kind of
recommend
businesses
the
that handle
zoning
hazardous
bylaw
Right,
be
that's not what we
evaluated
wanna-
without
That's not what we want to say.
So currently, I'm sorry, so currently it just, the revision is, from what I've been hearing in the room, investigate a hazardous waste bylaw.
Investigate a hazardous waste bylaw.
As it relates to businesses.
Well, no, let the investigate, let the process decide what it, because we have limits. I mean, people have the right to develop their land. We can't prohibit everything and then tell people they own a piece of land that can't have any use to it. So there has to be some place, kind of like whether, the adult use, it's better to say you can have it here than try to say you can't have it anywhere. So you develop the bylaws accordingly.
You don't want to discourage biotech or bioengineering or
No,
genetic
you don't,
engineering.
that's right, that's right. So,
Film process.
And
just
and I don't think that's
investigate a
the
hazardous
intent
waste
here.
bylaw.
That wasn't the intent here,
No.
but
right.
it's very difficult to constrain or define exactly.
Well, unfortunately, we had a
what
bad
they want.
experience that's.
Oh, yeah,
permeated.
yeah, I know.
Okay, so to investigate a hazardous waste bylaw does not, in and of itself, say we're gonna do anything to or against anyone or any entity.
Right.
We're
I'd
just
say
gonna look at what
hazardous
those
waste
bylaws
facility.
say.
Hazardous waste facility bylaw.
It's
Okay,
actually
hazardous waste facility.
Yeah.
That's what she said.
Okay, there you go. All right. Okay, and the last one?
And the last one, it looks like Jeffrey, you had a comment on, guide development and redevelopment into areas that have a physical, environmental, and infrastructure capacity to result in reduce impacts.
And, okay, the recommendation is that it's too broad.
Right.
Right, it was
That
just,
was from me too, I pulled it from either Schuster or Hudson.
right, I think, I like it in the spirit of what it was doing here, but it just, I posed the question, how do you wrap your criteria around what that is? That's just a challenge.
Right,
That's all.
and I guess when I was thinking about the hazardous waste facilities, another reason that the hazardous waste facility, what shouldn't have been on Route 20 is because it's also a trucking facility. Like, trucking facilities should be in industrial where they're near the highways and they're near. So I guess I was trying to guide developments when they come in the future to be in the proper areas, like.
Should live off Church Street.
Right, I think what you're trying to say is tighten up zoning so that businesses or industrial or residential is cited where residential business, commercial and industrial belongs, and not skirting the rules to be elsewhere. I don't know how to say that right.
But just to build on that idea, like, the whole reason why you have zoning and zoning districts is to say, here's where you want these things in your town. There's the subcategories of like special permit or or, you know, other ways of getting approval for conditional uses and those things too. Maybe it's the subcategories that are not letting you do what you want in the primary one. So this just kind of like, if you took any of those criteria, how do you tie it back to something physical? Well, if I have enough land, if I'm allowed by right, why can't I do that? Environmental, well, if I don't have constraints environmentally, why can't I do that? Or infrastructure, what type of infrastructure capacity? Maybe I put it on my own site and I've got the capacity. It just, I was trying to help you lead towards, you have to better define this one.
Plus, I think this is getting a little bit overly specific as to the function of the planning board on an ongoing basis in terms of what they do in the review sessions and how the zoning is proposed to be changed over time. It's a little bit outside of the scope of the master plan. The master plan is focusing, I think, a little bit more on longer-term conceptual things that need to happen in the town, like the development of the downtown, or better walkability, or things like that. And I think this just gets back to some of the more, you know, ongoing things that have to happen in terms of planning and reading of the zoning bylaw. So I felt that way about the bullet above as far as hazardous waste also. That's just the ongoing job of the planning board and the ZBA to manage that on behalf of the town. But if we want to leave something in on the above bullet mentioning we should be considering, you know, better protection against hazardous waste, we could do that. But the next one, I think, is just kind of ongoing planning activity.
That's
Yeah,
it.
so this is one here, it's like,
Okay, yeah. Oh, I know, I was gonna do the next, 1 second, I'm sorry.
At the very end, I'm on these comments.
Yes, I wasn't gonna leave you out, sorry. Okay, so on that note, how do people feel about the last one just going, since it's not specific?
Striking it.
Striking it?
That's fine.
Okay, all right, everybody? Okay, so I did want to say that we had two gentlemen who were very patiently and listening to everything that we were doing, and I was hoping we would get through 1 or 2 sections and then allow them to speak about that, but, so we are there, and I apologize if you could just, again, state your name and then just, oh wait.
My name is
I
Henry
think-
Squilanti,
Okay, all right.
72 Crestwood Drive. I've attended 3 of these meetings. I've been coming to town meetings for 30, 40, 50 years, something like that. A couple of comments, just comments, observations as a voter, if somebody's going to attend a town meetings. Your presentation should be concise. You should have the answers. We've been through this before where you come and we say, what does this mean? Well, we'll have to look into it. That isn't what you want to present to the town meeting, number one. I heard a lot of contradictions. We want growth, we want open spaces, we want taxable spaces, we want to require open spaces, which takes away from taxable. We want affordable housing. Tax rate causes the affordable housing to go up. So you can have one, the other. But you should pick which one you want. The other thing, downtown. When we first started this meeting, we wanted an attractive downtown. Now we're here walkable. When's the last time any one of us walked around downtown? Get out of my car, go into CVS. Okay? Downtowns died in the 70s, 80s when malls came about. I don't know how we think we're going to attract downtown business again, especially with our traffic patterns downtown. Just my observation. Okay, and as I said, the presentation, it shouldn't be 30 or 40 pages because you're going to lose your audience.
Oh, you mean for when we have our public meeting?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Okay, so, well, it is a few minutes after 9. I am open, so obviously we're going to need that January 24th meeting to keep going. We'd really like to have something with the public in February so that then we can get the next survey out after that, so that we can then put something, we can actually then vote on these things. So we didn't take votes on any of these because they are draft form, but the idea is that we are in agreement that we're moving them forward in their next version of a draft, right, to present to the community. If anyone has any ideas or suggestions on how we can get through them faster without losing sight, that would be good too, because otherwise we won't get through them in the next meeting.
I would suggest that between now and 2 weeks from now, that we should all respond, I guess, through Kathy back to consultants, as to which of these recommendations for the balance of the report, each one of us individually is okay with the way it is. And if in fact a number of these things, the input from the committee is, we're okay with these, then at the next meeting, we wanted to discuss them. That we'll have some unanimity, if that's what we're doing, around a certain percentage of these that don't need to be discussed. So I would recommend that we all review the balance of the goals and respond to Kathy with the ones that we feel don't need discussion. And we'll see how many we all agree on.
Or ones that are recommended for deletion, or that just a yes or no, right?
And then those that we don't have, that response on, that people want to talk about, we'll talk about them. We don't need to send, if you want to send any additional comments or suggestions about them, you can. We've already had a process to do that leading up to this meeting. So I think the thing we could do to move this along is, let's see if between now and 2 weeks from now, we can get a number of them that we all agree electronically are okay the way they are, don't need to be discussed.
There's going to be a huge tendency to want to just slightly wordsmith something, for some reason.
Well,
I'd
maybe
be
that's the
okay with
next
it
time.
if, it was phrased this way, kind of thing.
And I also think to the goals, the land use goals were the toughest to get through, if I remember correctly. And those took the longest, just like tonight's recommendations took the longest. And I think, if I just remember correctly, and then I think that people moved through the rest of the goals pretty quickly.
And I did want to just say that Michelle Gillespie, who was not able to attend tonight, did give a written comment, but we didn't get to the sections that she had written comments about. So I just didn't want her to think that she was being, she was not being heard, but we didn't get to those. So,
I think just offering, I actually was going to echo what Rick said in terms of what we might do next meeting, and kind of come to the meeting with the ones you want to talk about, the ones that you don't, obviously, don't worry about those. I think we'll also might save a little time if you read the comments that Donnie put on the side of these things, and if there's anything you want to further elaborate on that, I think that would save a little bit of time about read it. If you agree with it or not, that's fine, so we don't have to go through all of those as well. Because I think now that we're in the groove of this, I think it can go pretty efficiently.
So we're going to work off this document, there won't be another one.
Right, just keep working on this one.
Right.
I think we pick up where we left off on housing.
Yeah.
Fran, do you want to talk about the public forum dates that we had talked about?
Okay, I do, but first, okay, so first I just want to say that minutes were sent out from the November 1st. That, if people did have a chance to look at it, if I could have a motion to accept or not.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we did talk about the next steering committee, which is going to be the 24th of January, and March 7th as well, if you guys can look at your calendars moving forward. As far as for the next public hearing, we're hoping to do it in February, and we were looking at the week before school vacation. And I think we said, so it was February?
We had talked about either, we wanted to throw this out to people.
Oh, right. Do you think we should try a Saturday, or do you think that the early evenings are working fine? I mean, there's some question as to whether or not it draws a different group, or should we keep it the way it is and encourage people to come because it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other? Should we mix it up or not? Does anybody feel strongly about a Friday night though being or not? Okay, all right, okay. So if nobody feels like Saturday is a better thing than what we were looking at dates that when the next large place, because we would either do the high school or one of the other schools, so that we could have, without any constraints, a large group and a nice interactive. So it'll be
High school
based.
worked well last time.
Right, so it's going to be based on availability, right? So, and definitely not the school vacation week.
Right, so
Right.
you were looking at
18th.
We were
the 18th.
So we were originally thinking of February 13th, which is a Wednesday, with a snow date of the 14th. But I'm wondering now, is this, are we,
Are we going to be ready for it?
yeah, are we cramming ourselves too much?
Well, all right, guys, can we commit, well, in order for us to make that week, we'd have to get through the rest of the document in its draft form on the 24th, which either means we have to change the way we do it, and/or we have to maybe expand the meeting by a half hour.
Yeah, I would agree, probably
On the
planning
front
for
side.
a little bit more time, but I think now that you're in the routine, you'll probably get through it. It's not gonna take us a long time on our end to tweak it again, to get ready for the 13th and the 14th.
Okay.
And recognize that it's still a draft, so
Yeah.
even, it might not be perfect, and as long as the committee feels like you can still tweak it a little bit more, it's your call if you think it's gonna be ready. And also think about, you know, you may wanna get some public comment a little bit earlier to go back and reflect upon it one more time. So if you're trying to get it too perfect and not get that comment, you might have missed something to it.
That's right, yeah, and that would be perfect. So if we can get through it on the 24th in its draft form, share it with the public, get their input, then we reconvene and say, okay, now we're sure that these drafts become the recommendations.
We're just laughing because February 14th is Valentine's Day.
Yeah,
so-
they said that, I don't know, it's 33 years, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Sorry, Jack.
So 13 might work better.
Well, if it doesn't snow, we'll be the 13th.
Honey, sorry.
So coming out of here tonight, are you all comfortable enough so that I can start advertising? Because I'd like to advertise a month
Yeah.
in advance for these public
Okay, all right,
forums.
so Wednesday the 13th.
Is everyone available that day? Did we already take a vote on that?
We haven't done that. That's
No.
that's where I'm trying to go.
So do we need to confirm that right now?
Is that,
I mean,
Your own vote, Adam?
All right, so Kathy, we're gonna send out an email to everybody saying, does the 13th work? If the 13th doesn't, then what does? Because we have school vacation is the next week, and then we're the last week of February.
Would the 12th work? Why is the 12th not considered?
I don't know.
Meeting.
Is that like planning Tuesday? That's a Tuesday, that's,
I have meetings
Were
every,
we all at the other one?
I have meetings every Tuesday.
Yeah. right,
No, so
right.
let's just go with the 13th.
Go with the 13th, and as long as the majority of people.
we just need enough of us.
Right.
I know the 13th is a big problem for me personally. We just need enough of us. So if we have 6 or 7 tables, we need one of us at each table. So we need those 5, 6, 7.
Right, and I wasn't at the last one, but I could be at this one,
Oh,
so,
that's the public.
yeah. All right, let's go with the 13th.
Okay, well, I was just gonna say, that Tuesday ends up being a second Tuesday, so
It's easy.
I don't have a meeting.
Okay, so see which day we can get the space.
And,
I can't do Tuesday, anyway. Don't do it on me.
all right, so does the 13th work for everyone here?
Not everyone, but the majority.
You're out?
Mark is out and Rick is out.
Um,
Mark and Rick are out.
I have a board meeting.
And Ashley's out.
Okay, so, and then the 12th, Dave said he is not.
So you have 3 facilitators that are out already.
At 15.
You're there?
We have
I'm out
15.
the 13th, yeah. I could do the Tuesday, the 12th.
Right.
I'm out the 12th.
Okay, Kathy, just, can you find out which day we can get the space, and then send out an email, and then we'll decide on that? Okay.
Bring your spouse.
There's a big difference.
Great way to connect. We'll have cupcakes.
All right, so we're gonna look at the 12th or the 13th, depending on if the space is available, and Kathy will send something out, and then we'll, majority will rule. Okay, all right, motion to adjourn? All those in favor? All right, there you have it, thank you all very much.
Are you collecting